Every person's story has something to teach us. How others view life, how obstacles are overcome, how joy is felt, how fears are faced, how love is expressed. The Matters of Faith podcast explores individual stories of people's lives and how faith plays a part. It may not be your story, but it may help shape yours. And now, Matters of Faith with your host, Jay Wilburn.
You found the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 201, and the guest I have standing by is Ryan J Pelton. Before I talk to him, I want to talk about him a little bit. He has several books out, ranging from books on ideas of spirituality to, I believe, crime fiction and horror. His most recent release is Boonville, and that's available now as you're hearing this, either live or recorded. And then right now for pre-order is Corey Island. We're going to talk about those books, his life, his journey, his career, and much more in just a moment. Before we get into all that, I want to remind everybody that there are advertising opportunities here on the Matters of Faith podcast. You can contact me directly or go through the Project Entertainment Network website, and very reasonable rates to share your passions with our audience, both in the live stream, on the recorded versions, both video and audio, so that's a pretty good deal. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network. My guest today is Ryan J Pelton. Welcome to the program, Ryan.
Well, hey, Jay. Good to see you.
I'm glad to have you on, man. I'm very excited to love your podcast and look forward to being on it again soon, and really excited to finally have this conversation with you. So the way we start out is to ask the guest sort of how did your connection to faith, your connection to religion, your journey of faith begin for you?
Well, that's coming in guns a-blazing. Yeah, it's interesting. My story is one where I didn't grow up in the church. I kind of grew up around the church, but not really in the church. My immediate family wasn't really church-going folks for most of my younger years. Was really influenced by my grandparents. They'd take me to Sunday school and things like that, and so I didn't really have any context for faith. And then kind of providentially, I ended up going to a Christian school in middle school before I was a Christian, and high school as well. And that was kind of a big influence for me, just kind of learning the basics of the faith and things. And I had some friends that were, invited me to church. And so, a lot of my journey is really just a kid who, found himself, wondering what life was all about. And people were pointing me to, the Christian faith and Christ. And so, yeah, it's always, I've always felt like I've always been behind for those that maybe grew up in the church or were more steeped in it. But, every day you're learning and growing and falling on your face. And so that's a little bit of kind of how I got rolling, I guess.
Now, do you think there's a difference in the experience or how it's processed or any of those type of things between a person that maybe their parents took them to church and they were raised up in it, and then a person that maybe had to come to that choice on their own later?
Yeah, I think one of the, I'm a pastor now, and so I have a unique vantage point, I think, for both groups. I mean, those that, part of the church that have, that's all they've ever known, and then those that have come in to faith later in life or as young people or whatever. I think for me, I've said this before publicly, is that for me, I didn't have a lot of the church baggage.
Right.
And you can interpret that how you want. But I didn't have any context for it. So I couldn't say this is good and this is bad and this is how you do things and this is what, it means to follow Jesus and all that, because I just didn't have any context for it. So I think for me, I was really, by God's grace, I think, was kind of saved from having to deal with some of the stuff that people deal with now. And you see people walking away from the faith. They're questioning everything that their church is about and that kind of thing, where I was just excited to be part of the team and part of the family. So I kind of came in just open and hungry and show me the way. And again, it was not all great. And there was many questions I had and, still have. But I think it was just a unique vantage point to not have to kind of spend a lot of time unpacking things and leaving things behind, where I came in kind of just open to, point me in the right direction. And I think I had a lot of good mentors and pastors and friends that kind of, got good books in my hands early on. and just helped me, sat under pretty solid teaching and preaching, and those kinds of things. So I was very, very fortunate in that way.
Now, there's the step of like deciding that a faith is right for you, and then there's an entirely different step where you decide you're going to be a pastor of that faith, and maybe an additional one past that where you think, okay, I'm also going to write about these type of things. So kind of looking at those sort of extra steps that come with extra responsibility and extra significance, what led you to decide that you were meant to be a pastor in addition to, whatever other faith identities you had taken on?
Well, it's funny because I think my faith journey and my pastoral journey is very similar.
Okay.
And because I didn't have a background in church, I mean, I remember talking to my dad, this is probably, late, probably early 20s, kind of end of college-ish, and just feeling this sense of maybe I should be a pastor. I don't know. I'd gotten real involved in the church kind of my late teenage years. I came to faith in like senior year of high school, and gotten real involved in the church, and people were kind of saying, hey, have you ever considered ministry as a calling, as a vocation? And again, I'm like, how do you even decide that? What does that even mean? And so I think coming into pastoral ministry, it wasn't this, this is a thing I've always wanted to do, or I imagine myself doing this. I didn't know a pastor. I mean, other than my own church, I didn't have family that went that route. So I think for me, it really was a calling. I mean, I was actually a business major. I was going to go run golf courses. I played golf in high school, and then got a scholarship to play in college as well. And you can cue the nerd jokes now. But I just was going to be a business guy. That was my dad did. I was going to manage golf courses. So I had no, again, desires to be a pastor. And then over time, there's, you kind of get to this point in your life where you feel like you're supposed to do one thing, but there's something else that kind of keeps calling your name. And,
right.
And so, I ended up, going into, went to Christian University and did some seminary later and those kinds of things. So, again, I think, I've always felt like a fish out of water just because of my journey's been kind of not typical. When you don't have that background, you don't have that context. Cause even when I went to seminary, it was, I was from the West Coast, and, just didn't fit in. And, I had, people looked at you oddly, like, how are you here? Why are you here? That kind of thing. Why do you read Stephen King? Those kinds of things. So, there's all that kind of baggage that I had to kind of deal with kind of in the church culture as well, good and bad.
What was your first pastoral assignment?
Yeah. So I had kind of almost like two different stages. So I was a youth pastor out of college. So I was a full-time youth and family pastor in California, and so I was in charge of overseeing high school and middle school students, and did a little college ministry too, and then did a little bit of preaching on Sunday mornings as well. The young guy, get him up there on the youth Sunday, quote unquote,
right,
where they didn't want to mess up the congregation too bad, so we'd lead worship and do all that. So that was kind of the first step, and then about 4 years into that, I went back to seminary. So I went back to graduate school and did seminary in West Michigan, and then after that, I was an associate pastor in Colorado for a couple years, and that was kind of like my first a quote unquote adult ministry experience. And I'll tell you a little story with that. I mean, just kind of thrown into the fire.
Yeah.
And I've told the story many times, but literally my first week at this church, the lead pastor was not there. He was on vacation or something. And I get there, and I have a little kid, 19 months old, my wife, just us three at the time. And I get there, and I get this phone call, and it's this 2-year-old kid has fallen out of a second-story window on his head.
Oh, goodness.
And he in the driveway. I mean, and it's like, I literally I barely know where my street is. I don't know where the hospital is. I don't know. I mean, this is maybe pre kind of cell phone-ish,
Yeah.
About that old. It's like 2006, 2007, somewhere in there.
Okay.
It wasn't as easy to, just jump on Google Maps and all that. So I'm literally crying as I'm, driving to this hospital. And then I get there, and it's just chaos. And they're, talking about this kid's not going to make it through the night. And, I'm praying with the family, talking with the family. I don't know what to do. And it was one of those moments where, you've gone through 3 years of reading books and training and conversations about ministry and church and life and faith, and it's like it didn't prepare you for those moments where, what do I do here? What how do I love these people? How do I help them? What do I say? And I just remember that was just a moment of like, okay, this is real, and people have pains and struggles. And the positive part of the story is the kid did make it. He has some pretty severe disabilities. I mean, this is 10, 13 years ago, but he did make it, and still keep in touch with the family a little bit. But yeah, those are the kind of things that you aren't ready for. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
And nobody was like, hey, by the way, your first week, you're going to have to deal with some heavy stuff. So that was interesting.
Where you are now in faith and in terms of being a pastor and from your experience and stuff, looking back on that guy, the first weeks and thrown in the deep end. I don't know if you can avoid being thrown in the deep end when you decide to be a pastor, but looking back there, like, what's the difference between sort of where you are now and what your I guess maybe your style or what you were able to do as a pastor compared to when you were just trying to figure it all out right at the beginning?
Yeah, and this is because you're a human, at least as far as I know.
Yeah.
When you're a human, I think when we're young, we have this youthful angst. We're very idealistic. We understand how the world works. I mean, once you graduate, sophomore year of college, you pretty much have understood everything there is under the sun. And so you come into ministry, you come into any job just with this kind of, blind-eyed optimism, and I'm going to show the world. And then what happens is you run into your own limitations, and you run into, realizing people are messy and sinful and broken just like us. And so instead of having this kind of like idealistic, this is how you do it, and this is what's right, and this is what's wrong, is that you really start to soften, I think in a good way. Mm-hmm. You soften, I think, and I think God's grace helps you do that, just to understand people are complex, and people do have a story, and there's pain, and there's suffering, and there's abuse, and there's stuff that I never dreamed I would have to, I mean, there's no sin, no evil, gross thing that I have never actually been a part of that I haven't heard or talked through with someone in a counseling situation, or I mean, other than I think murder. And there's this one guy, I don't know, he might have, but I mean, and when you're confronted with those things, I think what happens is you learn how to be patient, and you learn how to listen, and you learn how to forgive, and you learn how to, because the reality is, like, you're looking at yourself and you're realizing I'm the one that has a hard time forgiving. I'm the one that has a hard time loving. It's not just other people. And I have a story, and I have, brokenness and whatnot. Our second child, we have 4 kids, but our second child, Samantha, died after 4 days.
Oh my goodness.
And you forget, like, pastors have pain too, and they struggle too. And then when you walk with people that have gone through miscarriage or gone through loss of children or children with disabilities or what have you, you grow an empathetic bone, I think, which is good. And I wish I would have known that when I was, 27 and 28. Now I'm almost 42, but everybody would probably say that about their work, but there is a gift to that. There's a gift of years that you just go, you know what, like, this is a messy situation, and we have to learn how to be patient with people and love people well. So I would say that would be a big shift that happened to me, where I kind of went from idealism theory to actual, like, blood and guts, and it's messy, and and patience with people.
My experience, of course, I grew up in church. My wife was the one who became the minister, and she served as a youth minister at 2 different churches, and then went into other ministry, non-church based ministry, but religious ministries, and nonprofits and that sort of thing. And now she does a lot of the fundraising and graphic design and stuff for some different ministries, some freelance and one she's on staff with. So I got to sort of experience, even though she's been in ministry all that time, I got to experience church from the standpoint of, like, when you're the family of the pastor, which is a completely different experience from sitting in the pew, and then kind of going back to that. Even though she's still in ministry, when I walk into the church, I'm not connected to the minister. I'm just some guy, and that has its positives and negatives.
All right.
How over the years have you kind of navigated sort of taking care of your family while you're expected to take care of everyone else's family too, to a degree?
Right. And I think, I mean, you almost answer the question. I think I think very fortunate. I mentioned just some good mentors. And early on, I had some really good pastoral mentors that, modeled, I think, healthy family life,
Right.
where, because I think any job, like, I mean, especially for men, I don't know, I don't want to speak for women because I'm not one, but, is, we do find a lot of identity in our work, and what we're making and completing and succeeding in. I mean, we can be, kind of emotional pygmies sometimes. And when it comes to, connecting emotionally. So I think what happens is you find so much identity in what you're doing and accomplishing, that, you can, overlook your family or overlook, the people that are right in front of you. And so I had a lot of good mentors that kind of helped me think through that early on. Is just, what are healthy patterns? Not everything's an emergency. And that's probably one
Right.
thing that's really helped me is, unless your eyes are like bleeding out and you have a gun in your mouth, like most of the time, like the emergencies that we think are really emergencies are not.
Hmm.
So that can wait till tomorrow, because I'm spending time with my family right now, those
Right.
kinds of things. And you don't just have full access to me anytime, so you do have to set up some, I think, clear, healthy boundaries. And that's not to be a jerk. It's just, again, ministry is a 24/7 job. And like, if you don't set up boundaries, you'll just go crazy and burn out. So I think that was really, really helpful at the beginning. And then also just like trying to include my kids and my family in the stuff we're doing. I mean, in the
Right.
ways we're serving, rather than kind of keep them, separate from everything. It's like, hey, how can we get involved? How can we be part of this? How can we talk through this? How can we, like my kids help out with the kids ministry, and I got some older kids at this point, but I have 4 kids now. But just feeling like the life of the church is a healthy, good place, and there's good people here that care about them too. And we started a church about 10, 11 years ago now.
Okay.
So I've been the pastor of this church for about 11 years. And I think from day one, we just wanted to kind of, create an environment where that could happen, where the pastor wasn't just this separate guy or gal that kind of came in, preached a sermon and left, but they were part of the community. And so we've tried to model that and try to, let people into our lives, and not kind of do the, hey, I know, if you give yourself away, you're going to get wounded and you're going to get, your heart broken. But I think that's any relationship. So you have to be a little vulnerable to know those hits are going to come sometimes, but I think in the end it's worth it. So.
Now, I've spoken to a few different pastors who have been involved in church planting. Usually, many of them were involved in church in other aspects before they ever got to that stage. What would you say is the difference in planting a church as opposed to coming into one that's established?
Yeah, I think, the one, I think, main gift of church planting is just you don't come in with established expectations.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we do things. This is, what we've always done. I think when you plant a church, what's beautiful about the community that forms around it typically is that everybody's new and nobody has deep relationships, and so everybody has a place to belong and serve, and we kind of need everybody, and we need everybody's gifts, and that's what I love about church planting. And it's not, some people get into it because it's, it's the rebellious thing to do. And it's like, well, I can't, hack it in the 100-year-old church. So I'll just start my own, give everyone the finger. But I think, that was never I was not that angsty about it. I wasn't like, hey, I just need to start my thing. I think there was some calling there and opportunity there. But I love that part of it. It's you have this place where our church is 10 years old. So like literally there's only a handful of people that could say we've been friends for 10 years, but everyone else is fairly new. And so
Mm-hmm.
it creates a community that, cause how life is. If you move to a new place, a new job, it's hard to break into relationships. I mean, I don't care where you live, in the country, especially in America. And so a church plant offers just community, almost from day one, because everybody's kind of in the same place. So there's that. And I think you can shape a culture that, from day one that you really want it to be. And I think that's hard when you're in an established place, because you could have great culture, but you can also have toxic, dead culture. And if the DNA in your body or you have a virus, it's hard to get it out. And so, a lot of guys and gals that have come into churches where it's just really hard and difficult in the cultures, they almost have to set a whole new precedent. So it's a little difficult with established, kind of congregations and things. So church planting gives you some flexibility to kind of do that.
Looking, I guess, comparing when you started to to where you are now in terms of, I guess, more broadly, ministry and Christianity and society. Is there a difference in being a minister now than when you first began with everything that's going on?
You know, I've been asked that a few times, and I always have a hard time answering it, because I think on one level, like, everything's the same. I mean, I'm a Bible guy, and there's nothing new under the sun. I think there's there's a season for everything. So I think on one kind of big general level, like, yeah, people are broken and sinful like you and I, and people do stupid things, and that's not shocking. Read a couple pages of scripture or read the news and you'll notice. But I think there's some unique challenges in our day, and I think one of those, because I'm this weird, I think we're close in age, but I'm in this weird generation where I do remember a day when there wasn't a cell phone,
right?
And I do remember days where there wasn't internet and people complaining about how slow their internet was. I remember dial-up, and I remember my dad doing the dial-up internet thing, and then somebody would call and it would like knock you off the internet. And it was like, everyone was like screaming in the house, like, oh my gosh, we finally got logged on at some magic number and now it's gone, that kind of stuff. My kids don't even know. I mean, my kids don't know what Blockbuster Video is. They don't,
right.
All that. So I think with that saying, we have this mini computer in our pocket called a cell phone. I think that does add some complexity. Social media, internet, instant, everything now, 24/7, everything now, everything in your face, streaming, all that kind of stuff. And and I'm not a Luddite when it comes to technology, and I think it's great, and I think there's good. But like any technology, we can use it for evil, gross things and become addicted to them. So I think, generally people still need the same things. They need love and hope and salvation and grace and all that. But I think there's some particulars that are a unique challenge that I'm navigating. I'm maybe navigating as a father. Like, I have a teenager that has a phone now, and it's like, there's no rule book on like, okay, how much is he allowed to be on this thing? And, when do we, can he just look at anything, and I didn't have that. I mean, if you
right.
wanted to, not to be crass, but if like you wanted to look at bad things, you had to really work hard to find bad things. Like now it's just like a click of the mouse, right? Or
right.
a click of your phone. So nobody's prepared anyone for that. And so I think there's some of that. I think, with media, I think there's just a lot of loud voices where everybody gets a voice, and yet, which is beautiful, but simultaneously, some people just shouldn't have a voice. And so, what does that look like for a pastor, and how you're leading a congregation, and how we understand, messages and people and politics and, all the crazy stuff that's going
right.
on. So that, yeah, I think there's just some unique challenges, and probably our parents would say the same thing, but yeah, it's all, there's good and bad, but hey, there's every generation kind of deals with their own stuff.
Within the time frame that we sort of established in your faith journey, where did writing drop into that?
Yeah, right. And this is, I feel even dumb saying this because I've said this on podcasts. It really is like, the 9-year-old kid in, English class when Mrs. Reed said, hey, here's some free writing time. I want you to write a story. I was hooked. Like I remember writing about Sir Ryan Pelton, the dragon slayer, just, and I don't remember if you went to public school or not, but in the back shelf of my public school in LA, this is when they gave kids paper. I don't know if you remember this. But if you needed paper, they had it for you, or pencils or whatever. So you'd go to the back little bookcase and you'd get these reams of paper. And I just remember just cranking through these reams of paper, just telling these stories. I remember my friend Jeremiah Brown, which you can't make up, we'd write different stories and we'd share them with each other. And this was also the days of typewriters, and go home and put tons of reams of paper and just make up stuff. So I remember just as a kid, like there's something, I always enjoyed the writing part. I think even, English class, I enjoyed writing. I didn't like math and science as much. I always just loved the literary part. I loved books. I always was a reader. And so I think that early stuff, I had a grandma who just read to me all the time. She was actually a speed reader, which I didn't even know that was a thing back in the day. And I remember I'd watch her read, and she would just kind of put her finger on the page. And this is, I guess, how you speed read, and you just kind of follow your finger. And I was like, I thought she was like kidding. And I remember like sitting with her, I was like, Grandma, why aren't you actually reading the page? And she's like, and I would like ask her questions, and she would go, oh yeah, this is the main character. And I was like, you're actually reading this. Like, this is amazing. And So, reading me C.S. Lewis, reading me, Tolkien, reading me just great stories, all, and I had an aunt that was a bookworm and all that. And so I think, kind of reading always kind of goes with writing. And then I think I just wrote about this recently. But I think what happens in a lot of us is like some of that's not encouraged. And so I remember moving away from stories and writing and, kind of get out into nonfiction. And then you get into like late high school, early college, and it's like, nobody has time to tell stories and, write fantasy stuff. That's stupid. You got to get a job and you got to do all that. So I remember that kind of left probably until about, my mid 20s where I, did the whole blogging thing and kind of got back into it. And I think that was like a gift to just kind of express yourself. And I wrote crazy stuff on blogs, angsty church, why everyone has it wrong and I have it right and all that. And then fast forward, I'll just give you kind of the whole thing. I mean, I think it was 2011, NaNoWriMo. Somebody told me about NaNoWriMo, and I had started to write some short stories with a friend, and we just were kind of, it was a guy at my church actually, and he just was like, hey, do you write? Oh, it's like this weird like club, like, oh, you write story, fiction? Like, this is crazy. You're weird. And then we just started sharing some stories, and then someone told me about NaNoWriMo, and I tried my first novel on NaNoWriMo, and I failed miserably. But I was in, and I just kind of, I think the fiction stuff, I had written some nonfiction since then and fiction as well, obviously, but that just kind of reignited my joy of fiction, reading more novels again, reading more fiction again. And that's kind of where I am today.
Looking at your catalog, you do have a lot of the spiritual work. You have Hired Gun, which I saw, which I assumed was crime fiction. And then of course you have more leaning towards the horror as well. Now, that brings up an interesting point where it kind of puts us into a really small club of sorts. Because if you, I don't have any spiritual books in my own name. I've written a lot ghostwriting, but I have the podcast. I'm known for that. But then I also was nominated for Splatterpunk Awards and things like that, and started writing children's books as well. And a lot of these things kind of all fell together at the same time, to where I really couldn't explain my brand to people as various things started catching attention. What sort of things did you go through, kind of coming to grips with? Okay, I'm writing these nonfiction spiritual books. I have this Hired Gun story I want to get into. I'm interested in horror and what these authors are creating. I read Stephen King, so forth and so on. How did you sort of incorporate all that into an identity that made sense for you?
I don't know, Jay. I mean, it's probably why I love guys like you, just because we're all kind of in this same weird world. No, I think there was a lot of insecurity. I think, I mean, to be honest, I probably would have wrote more fiction before I wrote nonfiction if I felt like I had permission to, which sounds really strange, and I don't know who I was looking for permission from. but I think sometimes in the faith communities in the world, you feel like I can't tell an honest story. It's got to be Christianese and Christian fiction and nice and neat, and everybody gets saved in the end, and the bad guys always get killed and the good guys win and that kind of stuff. And I didn't really read a lot of that like that. And the stuff I did, I had like good intention aunts that were like, hey, read this Christian novel or listen to this Christian rapper, and I'm just like, oh, if this is your music, I don't know. I just, this is back in tapes, threw the tape against the wall. And so I think, there's just this desire to, because I'd read like, oh man, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, over the years, and read, Graham Greene and some of these guys that were, faith guys and Christians and who else? Trying to think, the short story artist, I'm totally blanking on her name, short story writer, back in the day. And, and they were writing from a faith perspective, but they were writing these really honest, kind of gritty stories. Mm-hmm. And I started reading even C.S. Lewis, him talking about storytelling, and I was surprised by what he was saying. And he would say things like, the job of the storyteller is just first to tell a good story. And that really just struck me as that's the goal. It's not to try to, propagandize people or get some moral thing in there. It's really just tell the story that you need to tell. And I think your worldview will come through in that. And I think your values will come through that, of course. But what's weird is like, I resonated with Stephen King because I felt like I didn't know his background, but I mean, he felt like he must be a Christian because he talks like a Christian. He writes like a Christian. I mean, yeah, he has really dark stories, but like there's always faith elements in there. There's grappling with good and evil, you know, regardless of what you think. And then you read his website and it's like, yeah, he still reads the Bible, and he, had a Methodist background and all that kind of stuff. And I realized it's like, yeah, it's like this Christ haunted kind of writing that you just can't get away with, because when you're dealing with good and evil, that's just part of our faith and part of our story. And so again, from a quote unquote branding career, I mean, I've taken the worst path possible, and I'm trying to make it as confusing as possible for people that want to find my books. Like, wait, he's a pastor? What's going on here? People die in his books. And so again on that, but that's just me, and I don't try to worry about that. I think the most important thing is to, write the next book, tell the story you need to tell, and just see where it lands. And it's going to resonate with some people. And, and there's people that know me from my nonfiction stuff only, and only from my fiction stuff. And it's I try not to like obsess over that. And I think that's probably with age too. It's just let it be what it needs to be. And then what's fun is that I've connected with so many Christians that are just going, man, I want to tell these stories, but I don't want to, I don't want to write the next, Amish romance, book.
I've ghostwritten a few of those too.
Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's like, they literally, I've met people in Kansas City, like, can we have coffee and talk about this? Cause I feel like, you're doing what I want to do. And I don't want anyone to know I'm even here, it's kind of stuff. Right. I'm just like, it's kind of crazy. So yeah, I think just kind of watching other people that have kind of, in the same, I don't call it a struggle anymore, but what does this look like? You feel like you want to write some nonfiction? Great. You want to write fiction? You want to do both? I mean, fine. But, all the advice is always, you got to be one thing, and it's all about brand, and it's all about,
right.
I'm like, there's a reason Stephen King writes a lot of different books. It's because people just like his stories.
I don't want to get you in any trouble, but this is a topic I've kind of discussed with some folks from time to time. What do you think are the key elements that are missing from Christian fiction that kind of rob it of its power? Because, if you're dealing with God and good and evil and all those sorts of things, that seems to be the formulas for really great fiction. But you don't seem to find that quite as much as you might like when you specifically put it into the category of Christian fiction. So what in your opinion, what is sort of the big shortfalls of that category of writing?
Well, I think what happens, and again, I also want to be really clear that there's a lot of great Christian authors that don't write crappy Christian books. Like, I just want to say that, like that, you know what I mean? Like, I actually interviewed a guy recently that writes these fantastic crime novels. And again, I think his problem is the same thing. It's like, it's not, quote unquote Christian enough. So, yeah. So he gets kind of like, where do I fit? I don't know if you've interviewed Mike Duran. He's another guy that's, Christian guy, but he's, writes mainstream stuff. And again, they don't know where to put him. They don't know where to, so again, this is very simplistic, and, again, I don't want to offend anybody, but, I think where it lacks is, it feels like you're trying to get a Christian message across in your books, but you're forcing it. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like, here's the message I want to share, and I'm going to write around that message, and I'm going to do everything through the characters and everything to make sure this message gets across. And you've read those books, and that is not even a Christian thing. That's just a literary thing where it feels like you're being preached at. It feels like there's some agenda here from page one. And I think that's really dangerous, because again, it doesn't do justice to what C.S. Lewis said is, the first job is to tell a good story. Get characters in a room and see who they are, figure it out. Because if you're starting with a theme and you're starting with an agenda, it's always going to come off stilted, and it's always going to come off, almost like you've already decided here's how it's going to end, and everyone gets saved and everybody wins, and you go, that's not true to life. Like, life is full of carnage and death and suffering and pain, and I mean, you've walked through health issues as well, and and that's how life is, right?
Right.
So we sand off all the real life stuff in the name of Christianity, and then we create like this alternative universe that really doesn't exist. Like, it's really weird. It's like you just wrote a book that doesn't exist. Like, this world doesn't exist. Like, it's what you want it to be, which we all do. But the reality is it's just not how it is, and it's not how people talk, and it's not how people think. And so and usually, the audience is predominantly Christian, so they know who they're writing to. It's a marketing machine. I mean,
Right.
again, I'm going to get in trouble, but I mean, Christian publishing, it's a marketing machine. They know, I mean, they're looking for authors that will write to the machine. They don't care about the world. They're not going, oh, how can I write this book so I can reach a broader audience? It's like, no, you're just reaching your own. And that's why, Christian music sounds kind of the same way, because they kind of put parameters on what it sounds like and what words you use and all that, but they know their audience. I mean, their audience is, 18 to 34-year-old, stay-at-home moms. I mean, that's what Christian radio is. That's not even a joke. I mean, that's what it's built for. So you're going to have certain kinds of music, and even we don't even call them disc jockeys anymore. I don't know, what you call them, but the talking people, they cater to that, right? So, and I think in the Christian, writing world, or I should say Christian, novel world, you get a lot of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Tell me about Boonville.
Oh, I'll tell you all about Boonville.
Hit me.
Yeah. No. So I don't know if you know, but Boonville is actually a real place.
Okay.
So Boonville's it's about 90 miles outside of Kansas City, where I'm from. I was on a kind of a personal retreat, and was actually in Boonville, walking down Main Street of Boonville. It's right by the Missouri River. And had one of these, you've probably had these moments where you just have a what if moment, and it's just a seed of a story idea. And it was, what if a kid was stuck in a town like this place, Boonville, and what if there was a religious cult that was somehow behind all the chaos? And that was all I had for the story. And so going back home again, it wasn't like I didn't start writing it right away, but I had just some very, very basic outline of just some characters in the Boonville, and did some research on even the history of Boonville, which is a very fascinating town. And actually, it's not like historically accurate by any means. So if you're a Boonville historian listening to this, don't send me emails. But it was just a seed of an idea about a small town. I've always loved. Give me a show, a movie in a small town that's kind of creepy and kind of weird. Like think Twin Peaks. I love the Wayward Pines series. I had read that and watched the TV show, and that's just a great, fun world to play in. And so that's kind of how it emerged. And I decided to do a young adult. It was a 18-year-old main character, so it kind of falls in the young adult kind of category. But kind of the thriller. There's a little bit of sci-fi mystery kind of stuff in there. So it was a fun book to write.
What would you compare it to?
Yeah, I think it would be it would be a YA version of kind of Wayward Pines. And so if you've read the Wayward Pines trilogy, but without the sci-fi, it's he goes into kind of a whole different thing where I try to leave it. The story feels kind of more like a very Stephen King kind of YA version where Castle Rock, pick your story, where there's just some stuff behind the scenes in the town, and it just seems like normal, happy people, but there's just some evil stuff lurking. And that's a little bit what the main character, Charlie Tanner, finds himself in, is this town. He's stuck there. A van crashes. He's supposed to be taking, so here's the promise. He's supposed to be taking these kids to a camp. The van crashes. He doesn't know what happened. When he comes to, all the kids are missing. He ends up in this town. There's a sheriff. There's all kinds of stuff, just weird stuff going on. His parents won't call him back. He doesn't know what's going on. So that's kind of where it begins. And so, again, Twin Peaks, even like a little Stranger Things, when you think about just these kind of weird, nebulous small towns with weird stuff happening behind the scenes, and you can't really put your finger on it. But there's a religious cult called The Source, that is doing some things that kind of plays into the storyline, and I actually have it outlined out for a trilogy. So,
oh, cool! You mentioned some influences there early on, and then as you're describing that, sort of tell me about figuring out your own voice, as you might have been tempted to imitate Stephen King or some of your other influences like that. How did you sort of figure out what Ryan's storytelling voice really was?
Yeah, I would say for me, like my style is, I think I've been really influenced by, and maybe it's frustration. This is a weird thing. This makes sense maybe in a minute here, but some of the, I mean, you're a big, I know you love Stephen King. I do too. But I mean, a 1,000-page book is just really difficult to, I mean, one, you have to have serious, storytelling chops to keep people interested for 1,000 pages. That's one thing. But I also think, Stephen King is a product of the publishing industry, which kind of big bloated books. But if you look at literature and the history of literature, like some of the best novels and stories we have are very short and to the point. And I think we got into a publishing world that bloated books because they need to look big on the shelf and kind of show like this is worthy of paying $25 for or whatever. And so I would say for me that's a big influence, that some of the stories I've enjoyed the most they're kind of straight line page turning stories that keep you in the story. And just go right, go for it on the shorter end. So I mean, it's shorter end, but I mean 50, 60,000 word novels.
Right.
So I would say that's just one influence. I realize people's time are people reading on phones now and Kindles and don't have a lot of extra time. And so I want to tell a good story in a short period of time and give them a few hours of fun and kind of move to the next thing. So that's one influence. I mean, I think my longest book is 60,000 words. So,
okay.
But I'd also say like I have this kind of sarcastic sense of humor as well, and I think that always comes into my stories.
Right.
So I love writing like middle grade stuff and young adult stuff as well. When I've written a few of those, and it's just fun to kind of let that part of your personality come out, and give people, or it's not so. Some books are just so serious, and it's like even when you're dealing with like heavy, dark suffering, murder, crime, whatever. It's like just to have the characters have a kind of a sense of humor, and so I think there's a lot of that. You always have to have your straight man too, but I find a lot of my characters are funny in many ways. At least I think they're funny, and so I would say that's probably part of it. And then there's always, I think, that third element. I can't get away from it, but it is the faith element. It's I love, and maybe why I like your stories too, is I love the man or woman or kid that's struggling with faith. Mm-hmm. And I tend to have a lot of characters that it's not this like nice need. It's just like, I grew up in the church, or I'm in the church, or I'm, and I'm struggling and I don't know. And actually this story, it's not a, Christian novel, but it deals with a kid who's really wrestling with his own calling, and his dad really wants him to be kind of go into more ministry stuff, but he's like an artist and he's a writer, and he just feels like that's just not my thing. Mm-hmm. And so, I deal with a lot of that stuff, just faith and doubt and pain and struggle, and but also hope and grace. I hope that comes out of my stories too, that even in the hard stuff and the suffering, there's also hope too. So
do you have to write differently, or do you have to modify your voice as you move between, I guess even your nonfiction, but then your adult crime and horror, and then when you start moving into YA and then on down to middle grades, or are you sort of a different writer in those when you put those hats on, or how do you sort of sort that out?
Yeah, and again, I don't want this to sound like boasting, but one of the things that's worked for me and against me is that I think I'm able to kind of write in different tones and for different audiences. Mm-hmm. And I like that. Like I like telling different stories. I like YA, I like middle grade, but I also like, just adult crime. Right. And so right. I don't think if you read any of the, you would even hear that, because middle grade, I don't know if you've tried middle grade, but it's a great challenge. Because you need an economy of words. You got to talk, through a narrator of typically a kid. You have a Ricky Rayburn series, which, is kind of this Indiana Jones / kind of adventure story. And you got to talk through this kind of 12-year-old kid voice, mm-hmm. and so it's not going to sound like, Hired Gun or Dexter O'Kane's this, kind of drunk, divorced, like it just doesn't, I mean, I tried that with the Ricky Rayburn, but I was like,
not big in the middle grades.
Yeah. Moms aren't going to like that. And Ricky has a drinking problem, so, but I think, understanding the humor of a 12-year-old versus an adult,
right.
Real adult things versus, kid things. And I think, when I start out to write, I'm not a huge outliner. Mm-hmm. I have seeds of outlines and characters and at least kind of an idea, a few what ifs to kind of go with. But I always find that the stories, they become what they need to be. Mm-hmm. And they kind of find themselves. And so I think what I mean by that is they're not all going to feel the same. Like, it's not like I have this template and I'm just trying to like write the same thing over and over. I think like the Boonville trilogy it has its own tone. Hired Gun is totally different. These are like backwoods guys that are, kind of hillbillies that are fighting crime, and they're antique collectors. So it has a total different vibe to it. Feels a little more noir a little bit. So I would say that's I like the challenge of that. I think that's probably my own sickness. Like, just, I could just write the same stuff over and over and over, but I love trying to write YA, trying to write middle grade, trying to write adult, and then putting on the nonfiction hat too. Like, I love all of that, the more research heavy stuff and all that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, I don't, it's not like an intentional thing. But you're aware of it, you're aware of it.
Tell me about Corey Island.
Corey Island. So Corey Island was influenced by, one, I just wanted to write a novella. I had, written Boonville, which is a longer novel, and something about the size of a novella just really is a fun, I imagine you've probably written a few. Yeah. It's just that length is just, you can tell enough story, but it doesn't, overwhelm you. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've seen the series Third Day. It's with, I can't think of his name, British guy. He was in the Holiday. That's my wife's favorite movie. The British guy. But anyway, it's about this place actually called O.C. Island, and the whole story takes place on this island, and it just had riveted me. I love it's kind of not very popular, but I found out O.C. Island is actually an actual place in the UK, and it's this island, and there's this causeway that actually at high tide you can't get across. You have to take a ferry, and then at low tide you actually can drive your car across. And it was built in the Roman Empire, 2,000 years ago, and really just kind of a neat place. And that seed of an idea, again, it was a what if. My story has nothing to do with that, but it was about this fictional island in Washington. And it was about this guy who lost his wife, and he's bringing his two daughters back to Corey Island to kind of grieve the loss of his wife, who happened to die at the island. And it was one of their favorite family spots. And they're just kind of dealing with that. And then as the story goes along, they find out that Sarah Collins, who's his wife, is not who we think she is, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay. And there's all kinds of stuff that happens, and there's a huge twist at the end, and I won't give that away either. But it was just I love island settings. I loved Shutter Island. I love the movie. I love the book. Lord of the Flies. There's just something about putting people trapped on an island and just letting them go and see where it happens. And then when I was done with that book, I realized the book was about marriage. It was about dealing with the person that sleeps in your bed if you're married. And we, there's parts of us that we are scared to unveil, and there's parts of us that we're not honest about. And there's things that, we let get in the way of our marriages. And it's funny because that was not my intention. I wasn't writing a marriage book. It's not, that sounds like I wrote a marriage book, but it's not. It's, it's those themes that you're not trying to, it's a little bit what Stephen King talks about in on writing. Yeah. Don't try to just pick a theme and go for it. It's let the theme emerge as it needs to emerge. And that's kind of what came out of it. And, and I think it was a really fun story to tell, and probably some healing in my own marriage through it, just, keeping, your marriage, priority and things like that. So that's a little bit of that novella. It's a fun one. It's pre-ordered right now. I think it'll be available later in the month, February.
How many open series do you have going right now?
I have a few. So I have a middle grade series called the Ricky Rayburn Chronicles, and I have 2 books in that series. I am actually going to write a third one later this year. Boonville, so Boonville 1, which is just called Boonville. There'll be 2 more in that series, and I think I'll be working on number 2 later this year too. It's on the calendar. And then the what I call the Dexter O'Kane crime series, which used to be called Antique Assassin series, but it's the Hired Gun, all those books. There's 5 of those. I'll be writing another one of those. So there'll be book 6 of that series. Those are all series. Then I got a few standalone shorter things. I have a book called The Boardwalk, which is actually my favorite book, but nobody likes it. So, we all have those books, right? It's this one's for me. So, I think it's great, but anyway, it's standalone. It just kind of is there, but I think it's a fun read.
Was it purposeful to have all those series going at the same time, or is it just kind of something you stumbled into?
Yeah, I think I don't know how you are with when it comes to series. I know you have like one of your big 9-book series going and some other ones. I think I've heard you talk about yours. It's like this. It just needs to be that for some reason. Like you just feel kind of in your bones. Like this one has a long runway and others don't. Like my book, The Boardwalk, it just doesn't have anywhere to go. I mean, it could, but it just needs to be what it needs to be. So I think like a book like Ricky Rayburn, which is kind of an Indiana Jones type, there's just a lot of stories that are in there. I mean, that you can keep going with that forever. Boonville just felt like I had kind of 3 kind of big storylines. It's a little bit when I read The Hunger Games, it's a trilogy, and I like the way they kind of set up that series as a trilogy, and it just felt like Boonville would actually fit really well, that kind of idea. So, I don't, again, I'm just kind of an intuitive writer in the sense of what I need to write next or what, and I try not to do the whole, like what's getting a response.
Yeah.
People like the Dexter O'Kane series, and it's definitely a world that has a lot of, ways to go with it. I mean, it can be endless if I want it to be, but I'm like most people, I get bored and I don't want to just write in the same world, forever and ever and ever. So, we'll see where those go.
When did you start the podcast?
So I have, and I don't know if you know this, but so we have the Prolific Writer podcast, which actually ended last year. Okay. So I don't know if you knew that. I'd like to publicly acknowledge Armand Rosamilia, who booted me off the network. So apparently it was doing too well, and he's like, "Sorry, kid, you're too awesome." So
yeah, that sounds just like him. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was too awesome for you guys. No, it was time. It was actually really good timing. So I was doing just the Prolific Writer, which is still available. It still gets lots of downloads, and it's a great podcast. I have people like Jay Wilburn on there.
It is a great podcast. I really enjoy what you did with it.
And, who knows, maybe we'll pick it up someday. But yeah, I started a new one called The Common Grace Project. And it's really just similar to maybe this podcast, just interviewing interesting people that tend to have a faith background doing interesting things. So we've had, a guy talk about God and guns, and we've had a crime writer on there, and we've had all kinds of fun things. So that's kind of a new project. And again, I do a little talking on there from different issues and subjects that I find important. So yeah, just kind of a little new experiment. But as you know, podcasting is difficult and it takes time and to keep kind of going at it. And so, but yeah, we'll see where it goes. And so check out the whatever podcast you like.
What sort of brought you? You mentioned it a little bit, but what sort of brought you to the decision that your author podcast, which was doing well, was done, and that it was time to begin this new one instead of just taking the free time or whatever? Yeah.
I mean, I did. I mean, definitely took a few years off. I think it's funny. Like even before the Prolific Writer, I think I had this idea actually before that one.
Okay.
And it just became something else, and it was great. And it's funny. I still get people mail me books like every other week. Hey, can I come on your show? So I get a lot of free books, so it's fun. Maybe I need to go back to it, but it's one of those things where, when you're specifically only talking about writing, I got to a point where I felt like I don't have anything else to say. Like I know, I know that sounds like really, maybe it sounds arrogant. It's not meant to be. It just, you spend, a bulk of 3 years. I did a little course with it and all that kind of stuff. And on writing and I'll still do some of that. And I think I shifted more to just how can I help people, become writers or write more and that kind of thing. Where I love talking to writers but it's a big commitment. I was doing it like twice a week and, all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate, I still have friendships like yourself that are still going from that. And so I'm really thankful for that part. But yeah, there's a point where like you're so, niched down to this one thing that you're just like, I just want to talk about other things. It's fine. Like, I just want to mix it up a little bit. So, and that's why like this podcast too. It's like, you have faith people, but you talk about all kinds of issues and things and, it's not just one thing. So, yeah, that's a little bit of that.
Before we go, I want to remind everybody to check out Ryan's work. We're going to focus on 2 things right now, but you can just go to his Amazon page and pick whatever. Pick the novella that nobody likes. It would be nice to show him that isn't true. But Boonville, it's book 1, but you can just jump on this one and see what you think about it. And then pre-order Corey Island, a good novella that I think you'll probably enjoy. So thanks for being on, man.
Hey, I really appreciate it, Jay. Thanks for you have great questions and hopefully help a few people.
I hope so too.